Sentry, eyes front, chin up, you call that a posture? The voice came barking across the cobbles of the barracks gate, sharp and clipped, the way a man speaks when he wants every word to land like a slap. I am Major Renner, Inspection Authority, and I am ordering you to ground that rifle and present your boots for review. Now, soldier. Now. I was 20 feet away, half in the shadow of the guardhouse arch, and I knew within 3 seconds that the man in the pressed dark coat was no major. I had served under majors. They do not bounce on the balls of their feet. They do not glance at the small camera clipped to their lapel to make sure the red light is on. And they do not, ever, smile while they shout. But the man he was shouting at did not know any of that yet. Or if he did, he gave nothing away. His name was Aldous Crane, and he held the east post of the Wexelo barracks gate the way the old stone held the wall, without effort, without complaint, without the faintest tremor of doubt. He stood at attention beneath the gilded ironwork, red tunic flawless, bearskin squared, white gloves on the rifle, eyes fixed on the middle distance as though the whole loud world were a fly he had decided not to swat. I am Theo Marsh. I have stood beside Crane on that gate for 2 winters, and I am the reason you are hearing this story at all, because I saw the whole thing, start to finish, and I have never in my life watched a man dig his own grave so cheerfully. Are you deaf? The fake major stepped closer. Into the lane the public is not permitted to cross, his polished shoes ringing on the stone. He had the bearing down well enough anyone who had watched a parade could mimic the spine of it, but the details were all wrong. The rank pins were the wrong color. The coat was a costume coat, the kind a theater rents. And the small crowd of tourists gathering behind the rope had their phones up already, which told me he had picked this gate, this hour, this guard on purpose. He wanted an audience. I gave you a lawful order, he announced, loud enough for the phones. Ground arms, kneel for boot inspection. A real soldier obeys his superior. Unless, he turned, grinning to the cameras, unless our little toy soldier here only knows how to stand still and look pretty. Somebody in the crowd laughed. It is an ugly sound, that first laugh, because it gives the next person permission. A ripple went through the rope line. A teenager called out, "Make him do it, Major," and a few phones swiveled. Crane did not move, not a muscle. The tip of his rifle did not waver by the width of a hair. His eyes stayed forward past the man, past the rope, fixed on something only he could see. And I, standing in the arch, felt the old familiar thing tighten in my chest, the thing every guardsman knows, the cost of holding still when every instinct is screaming to answer. Because here is what the crowd did not understand, what the man in the costume coat could not have guessed in 100 years. Standing still was not the easy choice. It was the discipline. And discipline in a man like Crane is not the absence of force. It is force held on a leash. 3 minutes, the fake major said, checking a wristwatch that was almost certainly borrowed for the bit. I'll give the toy soldier 3 minutes to follow a direct order, and then I'll have him written up for insubordination. You hear me? Written up. He spun toward the phones again, milking it. Stay tuned, everyone. We are about to see whether the famous KingsGuard actually respects the chain of command, or whether it's all just for the postcards. I should tell you who this man was, because you may already half know. In the weeks before that morning, a series of clips had been going around. A man in officer's costume, pranking police, hospital staff, transit workers, anyone in a uniform who could not easily walk away, barking fake orders and filming the confusion. He called himself a comedian. The clips called him something shorter. He had built a following on the simple cruelty of cornering people whose jobs forbid them from telling him to go away. And he had decided that morning that the disciplined men of the barracks gate were the perfect mark, the ultimate mark. A man trained never to react, ordered around by a man pretending to outrank him. He thought it would be his best video yet. He had no idea. 2 minutes, toy soldier. Crane's jaw was a line of stone, but I had stood beside that man long enough to read the things the crowd could never see, the faint flecks of the glove on the rifle stock, the way his weight had settled an inch deeper into the stone. He was not panicking. He was deciding. There is a difference, and only another guardsman knows it. What the fake major did not know, what almost nobody at that gate knew, was the thing I knew, because Crane and I had served the same long road before either of us ever put on a bearskin. I knew the shape of his hands. I knew the small white scar above his collar that the tunic mostly hid. And I knew that the title this loud man was waving around like a toy, Major, was a rank that Aldous Crane had held and surpassed before this so-called comedian had filmed his first humiliation of a hospital porter. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me bring you back to the gate, to the laughing crowd and the borrowed coat and the man counting down minutes that were not his to count. 1 minute, I'm being generous. The whole internet is watching you fail. And that was the moment a side door in the guardhouse opened, not loudly, not with any drama, just the quiet click of a latch, and Sergeant Vell stepped out into the cold light. Vell ran the watch that morning. He was the kind of man who could silence a room by entering it, and he took in the scene in one slow sweep. The costume coat, the phones, the man in the public lane who should not have been in the public lane, and Crane, immovable, eyes front. I expected Vell to cross the cobbles and end it, order the man back behind the rope, call it in. That is what the protocol said, and Vell was protocol made flesh. Instead, he stopped. He looked at Crane, and something passed over his face that I had never seen there before, not alarm, not anger, something closer to caution, almost respect. "Sergeant," the fake major crowed, delighted at the new arrival. "Excellent timing. Major Renner, Inspection Authority. I'm documenting a serious breach of discipline at this post. Your man here refuses a direct order. I'll need his name and number for my report." Vell looked at him for a long, level moment. Then he looked back at Crane. And then, this is the part I still turn over in my mind, Vell did something I did not expect. He gave a small nod, not to the fake major, to Crane. A nod that said, in the silent grammar of men who have served together, "Your call." And Crane, who had not spoken a single word in the whole long ordeal, who had stood like the gate itself while the world laughed and filmed and counted down his minutes, slowly turned his head. For the first time, he looked the man in the costume coat directly in the eye. And I knew, the way you know a storm is about to break, that the next 60 seconds were going to be the worst 60 seconds of that loud man's life. But Crane did not give it to him yet. That was the thing about Aldous Crane that the costume could never understand. He did not spend his strength on the first opening. He waited. His head was turned now, his pale eyes locked on the fake major, and the man in the borrowed coat actually faltered for half a heartbeat, the grin slipping a fraction before he hitched it back up. "There he is," the man announced to his phones, recovering. "He moves. The statue can move after all. So move the rest of the way, soldier. Ground that rifle. I won't ask a fourth time." Crane held his eyes, said nothing. And I watched the silence do its work, because silence, used right, is the loudest thing a disciplined man owns. Every second Crane did not obey was a second the man had to fill with more noise, and every word of noise made him a little smaller, a little more desperate, a little more visibly a fraud. The crowd felt it before they understood it. The laughter had thinned. A woman near the rope lowered her phone and frowned, glancing between the calm guard and the sweating major. "Maybe he doesn't speak," the man said, pivoting the joke. "Maybe they pick the ones who can't talk back. Is that it, toy soldier? Did they take your tongue along with your spine?" Here is what I have never been able to make people understand about that morning. The cruelty of it was not loud. It was practiced. This man had done it dozens of times, and he had learned exactly where to push the dignity of a person who is not allowed to defend himself. He fed on it. And the more Crane gave him nothing, the harder he leaned, because nothing was the one thing his act could not survive. A prank needs a reaction. A man who will not react is a wall, and the man had brought himself, smiling, to break his knuckles against a wall. I looked at Vell. Vell had not moved either. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching, and I finally understood the caution I had seen in his face. Vel knew what I knew. Vel had read the duty roster that morning, the same roster I had read, and on it, beside the east post, was a single notation that the costume could not see and would not have believed. Crane, A. Secondment cleared. And below it, in the small, careful hand of the watch office, the line that explained why a sergeant would defer to a sentry with a silent nod. Because Aldous Crane had not always stood a ceremonial gait. He had come to the bearskin late after a longer road, a quieter one, the kind that does not get postcards. I had walked part of that road beside him. I knew the things the tunic covered. And the rank this man was play-acting, Major Crane had earned for real, in places this man could not find on a map, and had set aside the way a man sets aside a heavy coat when he comes home. Crane did not wear it on the gate. He did not need to, but it had never stopped being his. 40 seconds, the fake major said, glancing at the watch, and his voice had a new edge now, a faster, thinner edge, because the laughs were not coming the way they used to. You're embarrassing the whole regiment, you know that. One little order, ground arms. Even a child could do it. He stepped closer, past the line of stone that marked where the public must stop, his shoe coming down a hand's width from the toe of Crane's boot. Or are you going to make me ground it for you? That was the line that changed everything. Until that instant, the man had only spoken. Loud, cruel, false, but only words, and a guard absorbs words the way the gate absorbs rain. But the moment he stepped over the marked line and put himself within reach of the rifle, within reach of a sentry's post, he stopped being a heckler and became something the protocol has a very old and very specific name for. He had brought his hands into the space a guardsman is sworn to hold. And I saw Vel's clasped hands come apart behind his back, slow and quiet, the way a man readies without seeming to. But Crane still did not strike. He did not so much as shift his weight. Instead, and this is the moment the whole internet would later replay 100 million times, he did the smallest thing imaginable. He looked down once at the man's polished shoe a hand's width from his boot. Then he looked back up into the man's eyes. And he spoke. It was the first sentence Aldous Crane had said in the entire ordeal, and he said it quietly, so quietly that the phones nearly missed it, so quietly that the crowd had to lean in, which is exactly why it carried farther than any shout. "Step back behind the line, sir," Crane said. "You're standing in a restricted post, and you're going to want to be standing somewhere else in about 90 seconds. The man laughed, but it came out wrong, a beat too late. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening a superior officer?" "You all heard that." "It's not a threat," Crane said in the same even, almost gentle tone. "It's a courtesy. I'm giving you the chance to walk back behind that rope on your own 2 feet while you still can do it with your dignity. Because in about 90 seconds, somebody is going to walk through that guardhouse door, and they are going to ask you one question, and the answer you give is going to follow you for the rest of your life. So I'd use the time to think." For the first time, the man in the costume coat went quiet, genuinely quiet. His eyes flicked to the guardhouse door, then to Vel, then back to Crane. Something in the guard's calm had finally reached him, not fear exactly, but the first cold draft of doubt. He had cornered hospital porters and transit clerks and frightened them, and they had reacted, and that had been the show. This man was not reacting. This man was telling him to think, and men who tell you to think are men who know something you do not. "You don't scare me," he said, but he said it to his phone, not to Crane, and a man who tells the camera he isn't scared is a man who is. Behind him, the crowd had gone strange. The laughter was gone entirely now. The woman who had frowned was murmuring to the man beside her. A few people had begun, quietly, to film not the guard but the major, turning their lenses on him with a new and unfriendly interest. The mood at a gate can turn in seconds, and it was turning. The mark had become the spectacle. I checked the time on the clock above the guardhouse. Crane had said 90 seconds. I did not know yet what he meant by it, what he was counting down to, what he had set in motion with that one quiet sentence. But I knew Aldous Crane did not say things he could not deliver. He never had. Not on the long road and not on the gate. And then, faint at first, under the murmur of the crowd, I heard it, the sound of a measured step coming up the inner court behind the guardhouse. More than one step. The unhurried, even cadence of men who have somewhere to be and no need to rush, because wherever they are going will wait for them. The fake major heard it too. He turned his head toward the sound, and I watched the grin finally die on his face for good. The man who came through the guardhouse arch was not in costume. That was the first thing the crowd registered, and it registered fast. There is a difference between a coat that has been rented and a coat that has been earned, between a man wearing rank and a man the rank wears, and the difference is visible from across a courtyard to anyone who has ever stood near the real thing. His name was Colonel Hargreave, the duty officer of the morning watch, and he did not bark, did not bounce, did not glance at any camera. He simply walked, with the same unhurried cadence I had heard coming, and the crowd parted for him the way water parts for the bow of a ship. Beside him walked 2 men of the watch, plain and unsmiling, and a third figure I did not at first recognize, an aide carrying a slim leather folder. Vel stepped to one side and came to attention. I came to attention. And the man in the borrowed coat, who had spent the last several minutes shouting about discipline and the chain of command, suddenly found the actual chain of command standing 4 feet in front of him, and discovered he had nothing to say. "Good morning," the colonel said. His voice was quiet like Crane's. The truly dangerous men in my experience are almost always quiet. It is the imitations that shout. "I understand there's an officer present conducting an inspection." He let the word officer sit in the cold air for a moment. "I'd very much like to meet him." Yes, that's me," the man said, rallying, because a man like that cannot help but rally, cannot help but believe the act will hold one more round. "Major Renner, inspection authority. I was documenting a serious breach of—" "Renner," the colonel repeated as though tasting it. "Which regiment, Major?" A pause, a fatal pause. "That's classified. I'm not at liberty." "Classified," the colonel said. Behind him, the aide opened the slim leather folder, not hurriedly, and ran a finger down a page. "We keep a register of every serving officer cleared to set foot inside this gate. It is not a long list, and I have read it many times. There is no Major Renner on it. There is no Major Renner serving anywhere I am aware of, and I make it my business to be aware." He looked up. "So I'll ask you again, and I'd think carefully about the answer, because there are a great many cameras pointed at you and the recording does not stop. Which regiment, sir?" The man's mouth opened, closed. The phones in the crowd had all turned now, every one of them, a wall of small bright lenses fixed not on the guard but on the sweating man in the costume coat. The mark he had come to film had become the trap he had walked into, and he was beginning, far too late, to feel the jaws. It's satire," he said finally, and the word came out small. "It's comedy. I do a character. It's just a bit. Everyone knows it's a bit." "A bit," the colonel said. "A character. It's content. It's not. I never said I was real. You can't." "You ordered a sworn sentry of this gate to ground his arms," the colonel said, still quiet, still even, and somehow that quiet was worse than any shout could have been. "You impersonated a commissioned officer. You crossed a restricted line at a guarded post. You did all of this on camera repeatedly after being given the lawful boundary, and you called it a bit." He turned his head just slightly toward Crane. "Did this man identify himself as an officer of the realm to you, sentry?" "He did, sir," Crane said, "repeatedly, by the rank of major. He gave orders under that rank and demanded compliance." "And did you, at any point, comply or abandon your post or surrender your arms?" "No, sir." "Why not?" And here Crane allowed himself the smallest thing, not a smile. Crane did not smile on the gate, but a kind of settling, the calm of a man arriving at the simple truth at the bottom of a deep matter. Because he wasn't a major, sir, and I knew it from the first word. The crowd heard that. A low sound went through them, the sound a crowd makes when it understands it has been on the wrong side of something. The teenager who had called out "make him do it" had gone very still. The woman who frowned now had her phone trained on the colonel, recording every word, and I could already see, in the careful way she held it, that this clip would not be the one the costume man had planned to post. "You knew," the colonel said to Crane, and there was something in his voice now, an undercurrent that told me he was not asking idly. He was asking because he too had read the duty roster. He too knew the small notation beside the east post. "Tell them how you knew, sentry. They're recording. Let them have it on the record." It was an unusual thing for a colonel to invite. Guardsmen do not explain themselves to a crowd. But Hargreave was not doing this for the crowd's entertainment. He was doing it because he understood, the way Vell had understood with his silent nod, that the only thing that could undo a lie filmed for millions was the truth, said plainly, by the man the lie had targeted. So he was clearing the road for Crane to speak. And Crane, who had held his silence like a fortress for the entire ordeal, finally opened the gate of it. "A major doesn't bounce on his heels," Crane said, his eyes moving once over the man in the costume coat, level and unhurried. "A major doesn't check his lapel to see if the light's on. The rank pins are the wrong color. That pattern was retired before this gentleman was likely shaving. The coat's a rental. The seams are wrong. The buttons are theatrical, not issue. And no officer I have ever served under in any service would step over a sentry's line to film a man who can't film him back." He paused. "But mostly I knew because I have stood where a real major stands. I know what the rank weighs. This man was carrying nothing. He just liked the sound of the word." The silence that followed was total. Even the costume man said nothing, because there was nothing left in his act to say. He had built a career on the certainty that a uniform meant a person who could not answer him, and he had picked, out of every uniform in the city, the one man who could answer him completely, and had simply chosen, until this exact moment, not to. "Sir," Crane added, and now he turned fully to the colonel, and I saw him do the thing I had been waiting 2 winters to see him do, the thing that made my own throat tighten. "Permission to remove myself from the post momentarily, so the watch can address the visitor properly." "Granted," the colonel said. And then in front of the crowd, in front of the wall of phones, in front of the man in the borrowed coat who had spent the morning calling him a toy soldier, Colonel Hargreave did something a colonel almost never does for a sentry on a public gate. He came to attention, and he saluted Aldous Crane first. The man in the costume coat made a small, strangled sound, because there is only one reason a colonel salutes a sentry before the sentry salutes him. And the crowd, every single one of them, was about to learn it. "For those of you recording," the colonel said, lowering his hand, his eyes still on Crane, "you should know who you have been filming this morning. You came for a man you were told was a toy soldier. Let me introduce you properly." He turned at last to the costume man, and his quiet voice did not rise so much as harden, the way water hardens into ice. "The sentry you ordered to kneel for your camera holds a brevet rank earned in service this realm does not advertise and does not need to. He came to this gate not because it was the only post he could get, but because he asked for it. Because after the road he walked, a man wants to stand somewhere quiet and guard something that matters." He paused. "The rank you were play-acting at this morning, Major, he wore that for real, and then he wore the one above it before you ever picked up a camera. You did not impersonate an officer to humiliate a man beneath you. You impersonated an officer to humiliate a man who outranks the costume you rented by a wide margin, and you did it on film. I will not pretend I have the words for the man's face in that moment. I have tried since to describe it to people, and I always fall short. It was the face of a man who has spent years pushing on doors that always gave way, and has finally, at full speed, pushed on a wall. The smug had drained out of him entirely. What was left underneath was simply a frightened person in a rented coat, standing in a place he should never have stepped, surrounded by the consequence he had spent his whole career outrunning. I didn't know," he stammered. "How was I supposed to know? He's just a guard, he's just standing there." "He's just standing there," Colonel Hargreave repeated, and for the first time there was the faintest edge of something hot under the cold. "Yes, that is exactly what he was doing, standing there, holding a line in silence for hours in all weather, asking nothing from anyone, which is precisely the thing you mistook for weakness. You looked at a man whose entire discipline is to give you nothing, and you decided that meant there was nothing there. That is the oldest mistake in the world, sir, and you have just made it in front of, I'd estimate, several million people." It was true. I learned later that the prankster's own live stream had been running the entire time. He had been broadcasting himself live to his hundreds of thousands of followers, hoping to capture the moment a KingsGuard finally cracked. Instead, his audience had watched, in real time, the moment he had walked into the actual chain of command, and learned that the silent statue he had been mocking carried a rank that turned his costume into a confession. The clip did not need editing. It did not need a caption, it told itself. Now, the colonel's tone shifted, became almost businesslike, which somehow made it more final. "Here is what is going to happen. Sergeant Vell is going to escort you off this restricted ground, behind the rope, where members of the public belong. You are going to provide your name, your real one, to the watch, because impersonating an officer at a guarded post is not a bit. It is a matter the proper authorities take an interest in, and they will be contacting you. And the footage you so generously broadcast of yourself doing it will be doing a great deal of the work for them." He let that land. "You came here to take something from this man's dignity. You will leave having given the entire record of your own conduct to the people who decide what happens next. I'd call that a fair exchange." Vell stepped forward. He did not touch the man. Guardsmen of the watch do not need to lay hands on a person who has already collapsed inside his own coat. He simply said, "This way, sir," in a voice that left no room, and indicated the rope. And the man who had spent the morning ordering a sworn sentry to kneel went where the sergeant pointed, shoulders down, the camera on his lapel still blinking its small red light, still recording, still broadcasting his ruin to everyone he had invited to watch his triumph. As he passed the rope, the crowd did the thing I will remember longest. They did not jeer. They did not need to. They simply stepped back, all of them, opening a wide and silent lane, the way you step back from something you no longer want to be associated with. A few of them turned their phones off. The woman who had frowned earlier looked at the man with an expression of plain, weary contempt, and then deliberately turned her lens back toward Crane, toward the colonel, toward the gate, toward the part of the morning that had been worth filming after all. And Crane had already turned away from the whole thing. While the colonel was still speaking, while Vell was still walking the man to the rope, Aldous Crane had simply resumed his post. He squared the bearskin. He settled his white gloves on the rifle. He fixed his eyes on the middle distance, past the rope, past the crowd, past the small shrinking figure of the man who had thought himself a major, as though none of it had touched him, as though it had been weather, and weather passes and the gate remains. The colonel watched him do it. Then he turned to me, because I was the nearest man at attention, and he said something quietly that I have carried ever since. "You served with him." It was not a question. He had read the roster too. "I did, sir." "Then you know I didn't tell them the half of it." "No, sir," I said, "you didn't." The colonel nodded, the way men nod when a thing does not need saying and they both know it. Then he straightened, returned to the parade voice, and addressed the crowd one last time, not unkindly, but plainly, the way you speak to people you have decided to trust with a truth. "This gate is held," he said, "every hour of every day by men who will give you absolutely nothing, no reaction, no argument, no satisfaction, no show, no matter what you bring to it. You may find that boring. You may, if you are foolish, find it weak. I would gently suggest you find it reassuring, because the silence you are looking at is not emptiness. It is a man holding a great deal in check on purpose because he has decided that you are worth the holding. The day you meet a man like that, the correct response is not to test him. He let his gaze travel once over the wall of cameras. It is to be glad he is on the wall. Then he, too, came briefly to attention, gave Crane a last nod, and walked back through the guardhouse arch with the same unhurried cadence he had arrived with, the aide and the slim leather folder following, the watchman falling in behind. The whole intervention, beginning to end, had taken less time than the prankster's countdown clock would have allowed for his boot inspection. That was the thing about the real chain of command. It did not need 3 minutes. It needed about 30 seconds and the truth. The crowd lingered a while longer, quieter now, taking their last few shots. But the show they had come for was over, and the show they had gotten instead was not the kind you laugh at. One by one they drifted off, back into the ordinary morning, carrying their footage with them. And I knew the way you know the sun will come up, that by nightfall the whole country would have seen it. I just did not yet know which version they would see, because there were 2 stories trying to escape that gate. The one the costume man had wanted, and the one that had actually happened. And the next 24 hours would decide which one the world believed. I will tell you how it broke, because it did not break the way I feared. That evening, the costume man did what men like him always do when a plan dies. He tried to bury it. He cut his own live stream into a shorter clip, trimmed out the colonel, trimmed out the salute, trimmed out the part where he said its satire in a small, frightened voice, and posted a tidy 30 seconds of himself inspecting a silent guard, captioned to make it look as though he had won. For about an hour, that was the version going around. But here is the thing about a gate full of cameras. You cannot trim a crowd. The woman who had frowned, I never learned her name, had recorded the whole intervention from the rope. Every word the colonel said, the salute, the man strangled its satire, the wide silent lane the crowd opened as he was walked out. And she posted it whole, unedited, with a single line. This is what actually happened. Watch the part he cut. By midnight her clip had buried his. By morning it was not close. The country woke up not to a video of a guard being mocked, but to a video of a colonel saluting a sentry on a public gate and explaining, in that quiet, hard voice, exactly why. People did not share it for the humiliation, though the humiliation was certainly there. They shared it for the moment Crane finally spoke, "Step back behind the line, sir," and for the colonel's last words, "The day you meet a man like that, the correct response is not to test him." Those 2 lines went everywhere. I saw them printed over photographs of the gate, read aloud, repeated by people who had never stood within a mile of a barracks in their lives. It turned out the country had been waiting for someone to say it. The costume man's account did not survive the week. The followers he had built on cornering people who could not answer him discovered, all at once, what it looked like when someone could, and they did not care for the view. The sponsors who had paid him to be edgy decided, very quickly, that there was a difference between edgy and impersonating an officer at a guarded post on a live broadcast, and they were gone by the weekend. And the proper authorities the colonel had mentioned were, as promised, in touch, because the one piece of evidence no defense lawyer could ever suppress was the man's own footage of himself doing it, narrated cheerfully by him, to an audience of hundreds of thousands. He had filmed his own confession and called it content. There is a kind of justice in that so clean it needs no help. But none of that is the part I think about. The part I think about happened 2 days later on a gray, cold morning when the gate was quiet again and the crowds had thinned back to the ordinary handful of tourists who come to see the changing of the watch and know nothing of what had happened on those cobbles. Crane and I stood our posts. The footage was still everywhere. We both knew it. Neither of us mentioned it. That is the discipline too. You do not carry the noise onto the gate. The gate is for the gate. Near the end of the watch, a small boy came up to the rope with his grandfather. He could not have been more than 7. He stood very straight, the way children do when they are trying to be like someone, and he looked up at Crane for a long time. Then he raised his small hand to his brow in a careful, wobbling salute, the kind a child makes when he has just learned what a salute is, and has decided that this man, of all the men in the world, is the one to give his first one to. A guardsman does not break protocol for a salute from the crowd. We are not permitted. Crane knew that better than any man alive. He had spent the whole filmed ordeal proving exactly how unbreakable he could be. And so the right and proper thing, the thing the regulations called for, was to give the boy nothing, the same nothing he had given the man in the costume coat. Crane gave the boy something. He did not move his body. He did not leave his post or bend protocol in any way a camera could have caught, but his eyes, the same pale eyes that had stared down a fraud without a flicker, came down just slightly, just for an instant, and found the boy's small face. And something in them softened. It was the smallest thing. It lasted less than a second, but the boy saw it. The boy's whole face lit up as though the gate itself had spoken to him, and he dropped his salute and turned to his grandfather, breathless, and I heard him say, "He saw me. Grandpa, he saw me." The grandfather, an old man with the bearing of someone who had once stood a post of his own somewhere, looked at Crane for a long moment. Then he straightened his own shoulders and gave Crane a salute that did not wobble at all. Crane held his eyes for that one too. Then both of them, the old man and the boy, went on their way. And I understood, finally, the whole shape of what had happened at that gate, the thing the colonel had been trying to tell the crowd. The man in the costume coat had looked at Crane's stillness and seen a void to be filled with his own noise, a man who gave nothing because there was nothing in him. He had it exactly backward. The stillness was not emptiness. It was a choice, made fresh every single hour by a man who had every reason and every capacity to answer and chose instead to hold. He gave the loud, cruel man nothing because the man had earned nothing. And he gave the small, straight-backed boy a single instant of being truly seen, because the boy had come in honor, and honor is the one thing the gate will always answer. That is the discipline, not the absence of feeling, the mastery of it, the deciding again and again where it is spent and where it is held. The costume man thought he was testing whether the guard was strong. He was only ever revealing whether he himself was worth the guard's strength. He was not. The boy was. Crane never spoke of it. He stood his post that winter and the next, and as far as I know he is standing it still, eyes forward, gloves on the rifle, giving the loud and the cruel exactly nothing and the honorable and the small exactly enough. The clip faded, the way clips do. The country moved on to the next loud thing. But the men of the watch did not forget, and neither, I think, did that boy, who is older now and may yet stand a post of his own someday. As for me, I learned the lesson I had been standing beside for 2 winters without quite seeing it. People will always mistake a quiet man for an empty one. They will always test the wall, certain there is nothing behind it. And every so often, on a cold gray morning at a barracks gate, the wall will turn its head and remind them, very gently, that silence is not the same thing as surrender, and that the man who chooses to give you nothing is, almost always, the man with the most he could have given. He just decides, every hour, that you have not earned it. And the rarest, finest thing in the world is to be the small, honest soul who finally does.